Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. This is the podcast where we look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And I always make sure we talk about sustainable design as well. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and today I have Dean Lewis from Skanska. Dean, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Joe, and thank you for doing this podcast. I think what you're doing for the built environment is great and spreading the word on sustainable solutions. So thank you for having me.
Well, I really appreciate that. Yeah, so let's kick things off the way I usually do, which is having you share the story about the path that led you to working with Skanska and your role at the company.
Yeah, and thank you for the time and space to do this. I guess, for me, it started really young. Got a family in construction. So my dad is actually a contractor, builder, and developer. And then my grandfather is an architect. And so, you know, out on the job site at a young age, started out collecting cups and nails on my dad's job sites. And from there, the older I got, I could carry materials up till, high school and working with him and seeing everything that he was doing, but then realizing very quickly that, I'm not going to be able to do this for very long. It's tough on your body. So I got a lot of respect for all the people in the trades out there and have brothers and cousins who are still in the trades. And so, but from there decided, maybe I should look into more of a design background. And so I actually was really interested in structural engineering and pursued that at Washington State University, and was very fortunate to study under professors that were really prolific in timber, Dr. Pollock, Dr. Bender, and Dr. Dolan, and a lot of others that really helped shape my career at a young age. And really fortunate, and didn't even realize it at the time, that WSU was one of the first major wood products laboratories on the West Coast, and just was able to benefit a lot inherently from there. And came out of school at a great time at the recession, and actually started with DCI Engineers in Spokane. We worked with some great folks there, Craig Crowley and Mark A. Thomas Holman, and then transferred over to Seattle and was able to experience, the Bolt Center, which was going up at the time. And that really, galvanized my career, because the Bolt Center was just a revolutionary project at the time, and just ahead of its time in terms of sustainability. Is one of the first living building pilot projects in the country, and it was in Seattle. And so living building pilot program, we'll maybe touch on it later, but that building's designed to last for over 200 years. And so really, it was one of the first experiences with mass timber and seeing it. I had studied it at college and talked with Dr. Dolan at lengths about it. I was really interested in it, but then to see it, coming out of school, you think a lot of things are hypothetical or theoretical, and to see it in person was really a game changer. But then it kind of went away for a while. You thought, well, that was a once in a lifetime project, and we're probably not going to see that again. And in that time period, then went down to the Bay Area with DCI Engineers, with Jeff Brink and Jordan Haig, Justin Bentner, Kyle Holman, and others, and got that office up and running. And that was just a great environment, because it was less of what have you done and more of what can you do. Kind of the Bay Area with the kind of entrepreneurial spirit, and kind of in the tech boom down in the 2000, it was kind of 2000 through 2018. I was there, and just a lot of great projects. And that was kind of when mass timber was coming about. There was the PRG 320 standard, which is the cross-laminated timber certification standard, and that started out in 2010, and I got on board on that in 2012. And in the Bay Area, it was really interesting, because there's obviously similar issues that are around the country, where there's housing shortages. And so a lot of developers and initiatives to try and create more housing. And part of the market there, I remember leaving Seattle, there was maybe half of the projects that were using prefabricated light frame wood walls. And we're doing some modular construction. Troy Bean at DCI, one of the great, kind of originators of that practice. And we came down to the Bay Area, and we started doing more modular and a lot of prefabricated light frame. And in that, started working in a design build capacity with these framers on different solutions to help prefab the buildings. And so we were looking at prefab walls, prefab floors, or full volumetric. And one of the groups we were working with at the time, they were doing prefabricated floors, which were nice, but you could really only span 2 units. And then just because of the size and the depth of the members, you couldn't fit that many panels on a truck. And so started to talk to them about, well, let's look at cross-laminated timber and see what we can do there. And you reduce your hardware, you can slim down the floor plate, save on your exterior skin of your building. And we started out just using it on small areas of buildings, the lobby areas or entryways, or, any places where they were trying to really an amenity space. And from there, once we were able to do it in a couple small regions of the project, the team saw how advantageous it was, and they really kind of fell in love with it, and it just grew from there. Then we were doing, full projects around 2015 and 16. Did the One Daharo project, which was one of the first, multi-story glue laminate CLT projects in California. Then did the Project One over in Oakland. That was one of the first multi-story mass plywood panel projects in the country, and then just really took off and went from just a handful of projects in 2014 and 15. By the time it was 2018, we had, over a couple dozen projects that had some element of mass timber in it. And through that process, started to work with Swinnerton's headquarters in San Francisco, and they had mentioned that, hey, we're looking at potentially getting something started up in Portland, and had very fortunate situation to get in contact with Chris Evans and Erica Spiritos and Graham Montgomery, and they kind of brought me on board at Swinnerton's Mass Timber Group, and then which became Timber Lab, which it is now. And worked there, had some amazing projects, worked with a lot of very talented individuals. And I was up in Seattle and worked on the Heartwood project, which was one of the first 8-story Type 4C buildings, and worked on a couple or a large scale higher ed project in California, as well as other projects with them. And through that time, everything was going great, but had a real opportunity that I couldn't turn down. There was a call from Sidewalk Labs, which was an offshoot of Alphabet with Google, and they were looking to start a mass timber prefabricated kit of parts factory in the Seattle area. And definitely couldn't turn that down, and joined their team. That was like 2021, I believe. And then worked on developing a kit of parts system with mass timber. So it's kind of taking mass timber to that next era, and is maybe a little bit ahead of its time. We lost traction when we're trying to get funding as the interest rates started to impact investing, and so the operation got shut down. And then from there, I was working with Skanska at the time on some projects at Sidewalk Labs, and then was able to, and lucky enough to have the opportunity to take a position as the director of mass timber for Skanska for the United States market. And that started just this past year, and now been working on projects across the country, helping teams in different capacities. And, Skanska is very unique. I think one of the things that I was really excited about was the fact that they are a builder, but they also, have a lot of different business units. They develop their own work. They do civil, they do buildings, they self-perform the work in the Pacific Northwest and West Coast. And then, also just have probably one of the better sustainability initiatives and are following through on it out of a lot of different companies out there. And so, and then also the international presence, they have, mass timber projects and experience globally. And so I saw that is just a real advantage. And so, again, just feel lucky and fortunate to be part of the team at Skanska and located here in Seattle.
Oh, very cool. So, Dean, just in layman's terms, for anyone who doesn't understand, what is mass timber?
Yeah, so mass timber is a vernacular that is actually codified now. For a while, it actually did not have a official terminology from a code standpoint. It had come on because it was just larger or massive sections of timber, which is very similar to what some folks in the construction industry would refer to as heavy timber. For those not in construction, it's essentially taking 2x members that you could get at one of your commodity suppliers, Home Depot or whatnot, and you are binding those 2x together either mechanically with fasteners or dowels, or you are binding them together with adhesives, and that is to make large format panels, which could be cross laminated timber. It could be dowel laminated timber, it could be nail laminated timber, or mass plywood panels, like I mentioned. Each one of those is basically timber, but it's in a panel that's in a very large format. It could be anywhere from 4 inches thick all the way up to 12 inches thick, typically minimum around 4 feet wide, but up to 12 feet wide, and then up to 60 feet long. So we're talking, yeah, massive sections of timber, therefore mass timber, and that is going to produce buildings that we're now seeing up to 18 stories, where typically timber's been limited to under 85 feet. We're now seeing and have a codified cookbook solutions for buildings that could be up to 270 feet tall, which is pretty revolutionary. And that's, yeah, something I think we'll talk about more. But yeah, that is hopefully a quick elevator speech on what is and what constitutes mass timber.
Yeah, yeah, that was great. And I do want to come back to the height thing. That's obviously an issue that probably is discussed a whole lot. I have to tell a quick story. Personally, I first discovered mass timbers right around the turn of the millennium. I was doing some work in Vancouver and in Seattle. We
Mm.
were putting extruded like multi-walled acrylics and multi-walled polycarbonates in roofs, like for sunrooms. And, because sunlight is very valuable in that part of the world, and any opportunity to bring sunlight in your home was welcomed. And I saw it for the first time when we had to we were attaching it to mass timber frames. And I remember thinking, my God, this is incredible. And I'd never seen anything like it on the East Coast. How long has Skanska been working with mass timber?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in the States, we've been working with mass timber, and kind of one of the things people ask about. So, glulam essentially is mass timber. And so, for
Mhm.
decades, Skanska has worked on glulam structures, which in reality, a lot of the complications with mass timber buildings, or a lot of the technical know how, is in the glulam, it's in the framing members. So, and our team has self-performed projects since the early 2000s. It wasn't until 2016 that we had one of the first CLT installations in the Pacific Northwest. It was at the Packard building at Washington State University, and that was with cross-laminated timber. So that was our first experience, and then from there it's grown. Over 23 projects now across the country. 8 of those we just completed this past year. 6 of those in the Pacific Northwest. 4 of those we self-perform the installation. So it's a growing practice at Skanska, just as it's a growing market in the country.
So, how do you measure growth? Is it by number of projects, total square feet of building? What's your number that says this year was better than last year, besides money?
Money is good, but
Good.
yeah, square footage is definitely one metric, and then number of projects is another one. And it is tough sometimes because projects could be, 300,000 square feet, but maybe there's a podium, and so not the whole project's mass timber. I guess how I try to evaluate growth is kind of 3 metrics: is, the amount of mass timber within a project, the amount of square footage on the project, and then, yeah, the number of projects. And the number of projects each one of those metrics at Skanska has increased over the past 2 to 3 years. And I could say that without one of our largest projects, the Portland Airport expansion, which is a 9-acre roof installation. And there is a little bit of steel on that. There's some steel columns and steel girders to carry the roof cassettes. But the majority of that is mass timber. And even if we didn't include that one, that metric, you'd think it would skew our growth or results, and it doesn't. So we've got other projects that contribute to that growth as well.
Why are people liking it so much? This growth is coming as a result of people wanting to build with mass timber. Why do they like it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the natural affinity for wood that people have. And Michael Green is an architect that's kind of a star architect in mass timber. And he had a quote once that I really liked, which is, timber is basically bringing the nature's fingerprint back into the building. And then he shows like nature's fingerprint, which is, you can look at a 2 by or the CLT panel and you can see, that it almost looks like a fingerprint. So it was a really good quote that I like. And I think that's the origination of it. I think, it's funny too, because when I talked to my father and my grandfather about mass timber, they always thought that it would never come into prominence as it has now. They kind of thought timber's always had its place, and, maybe log cabins or custom homes and obviously light frame construction, but I guess they never saw the potential of it going into taller or high-rise structures. And I think that's what's exciting now with the new codes, because you have this new potential. And so you almost have like a rediscovery of timber, but now it's in a more modern time. And so I think there's excitement about it because of the growth and the technology that's around it. Building information modeling, which was kind of coming through in the early 2000s, at least in my career, when, got started into construction. And, the ability to actually model an element and get it to a degree of accuracy wasn't really capable until, then the CNC machines, computer numerically controlled machines, could cut the timber to within millimeters of tolerance. And so you've kind of got the technological advance, and then obviously, we needed a little bit of progression with the supply chain, and that was in huge part in help from the Europeans who have been doing this for decades, to have that technology and that experience kind of come over. And then a huge push by the suppliers to invest in this technology and this building product that didn't really have a market. In early 2010s, some of the first suppliers were getting on board in Canada. And so it's just really, to go from 2010 to where we are now, if you think about it, is pretty incredible, because they're to have suppliers invest in something that there wasn't even a market in. And a lot of the suppliers even today are still 2 to 4 years in existence. So it's a very young industry, and so I think that is a lot of excitement. And then there's obviously a lot of excitement about it because of, I think, the focus on the built environment and sustainability. There's been a lot of talk for a while about operational energy, but then people are realizing the embodied carbon impact of materials and the buildings that we're building. There's statistics, that Europe is building a new Paris every year. I think for the United States, or I can't remember the statistic that Michael Green gives, where there's enough of the buildings that are being produced where it's basically a New York metro that is being built every year. And so people realize that if we're going to have any impact on our environment, we're building this much, putting this much product out in the universe. I mean, why not use a renewable material like wood? And so I think, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of aspects to it. I know you just had Katie, there was a couple podcasts back, talk about biophilia, and that's another aspect to it. There's actual science behind the benefits of a timber aesthetic in a built environment. And so, yeah, I think all those things culminate to a lot of excitement about this material and in the industry.
Yeah, I've had a couple of building scientists on the show who've said that our mood and our energy levels both improve simply by seeing wood. Just having it within our line of sight is enough, which is really incredible. We just did a huge project in Montreal. Well, Vaudreuil-Dorion, the new city hall, is a mass timber project. It's absolutely spectacular, and they took the entire front facade and covered it with our Solera wall, our frameless glass. And what a gorgeous combination! My God, I'll have to send you some pics of that project. It really is extraordinary. A question about the market, though. From what I understand, there's some major changes going on in the market right now. Tell me about those big changes and how Skanska is reacting.
Yeah, definitely the biggest change. The United States has taken a big leap. We did full scale fire testing back in 2016 to kind of validate this. And then the testing has been ongoing, and for the fire, which has been the biggest reason that timber for a long time was capped at 85 feet in the building code. And so in the 2021 International Building Code has now allowed a cookbook or a predetermined, classification for buildings to be 8, 12, or 18 stories in mass timber. And that is really the game changer of the market, because as we see a lot of cities now that are now upzoning to try and create more housing, what we call is kind of the missing middle, which has happened. And developers can maybe, agree with this, because for a while it was either, hey, we're going to go up to 85 feet and we're going to do a podium. It's going to have, 2 to 3 stories of concrete with 5 to 6 stories of light frame construction on top of it. Well, now there's another solution to get us into that middle range of the 8 to 18 stories before you kick into a full-blown high-rise. And so that's really the new archetype that's being developed right now. And I think that's also an exciting part, because it's no one's figured it out yet, and especially with different building types. Is it hotel? Is it residential? Is it office? Is it all mass timber? There's going to be especially in seismic regions. There's going to be brace frames or concrete shear walls that are going to be utilized for the lateral system. But then also the gravity frame itself, there's different options. There's a post and beam system, there's a point supported system. And you can use cold form potentially. You can use steel with a mass timber floor plate. So there's all these different solutions that, and there's built projects and examples of these around the nation now. And we can say that we have each type has been built. A type 4C, and type 4B, it's topped out. I don't know if it's completed, but it's definitely topped out. And then a type 4A. So now we have actually built examples of all these. And so that's kind of the invigorating part, is where the market is going, is there's these new solutions for builders and developers to evaluate and look at.
Okay. All right. I want to talk about sustainability. We've sort of danced around it a little bit, and let's do a little bit of a deeper dive on it. I mean, mass timber beams, they're poor thermal conductors, right? They don't conduct heat the way metal does, so they're obviously a better insulator, which is important, especially important these days where energy management has become paramount. But you know what? You're cutting down, and also when you look at it from a life cycle analysis perspective, I mean, what would do better than wood in an end of life scenario? Nothing. So it's very strong positioning sustainability that way. But you're cutting down trees, right? And you're removing the carbon sink of a living tree. How does that reconcile in terms of mass timber's positioning with regards to sustainable design? Is it an overall net positive?
Yeah, I think it's something that, you know, one thing I'll say at a high level is we try to do at Skanska is look at sustainable solutions for all materials. Now, mass timber has its own advantages given that it's sustainably harvested. And I think if you look at the supply chain, all the suppliers in North America have a standard for sustainability, whether that's FSC, SFI, or PEFC, which basically there's different metrics to it. But if you think about it from just a common sense standpoint, these timber suppliers, it is in their best interest to sustainably manage their forests, and they have been for decades, or some of them centuries even. If you go over to Europe and look at some of the suppliers there, it's in their best interest to sustainably manage these forests, plant more trees than they're harvesting every year, because it is prudent for them to have a supply in the future. And I think it does come up sometimes of question of, well, do we have enough trees to actually support the amount of buildings that is being proposed? And there was actually a really good study. Store Enzo should give them credit for this. They had Dr. Galina Cherkina on here, and she looked at the global supply at 10%, 50%, and 90%. And I'll trust her study, but I've had other similar conversations with suppliers in Canada and the United States. And essentially, as if we even get to 50% of buildings being mass timber, there would be enough world supply. Now, there's a couple things that need to be done. One is make sure that we're still, having sustainable practices for our forestry. And then two is just utilize the fiber more efficiently, because if you look at actually in Europe, about 50% of the wood that is utilized is actually for fuel. And that's something that obviously there can be better sources for heat or whatnot, and better just utilization of overall wood products. Not all wood products can go into actual mass timber elements. When you harvest the tree, maybe a third, depending on the supplier, about a third of it goes into the actual product and the actual element that has less defects, is structurally adequate, has the right grading. Third of it goes into the pulp, and a third of it is used for other wood products and composites. So I think there's certain aspects to this that need to be considered, but overall, I would just say that yes, I mean, timber has inherently, because it's able to regrow itself, a sustainable aspect. And I think the other thing that's being talked about at a very high level, I mean, NATO has actually had a council to talk about, the biogenic carbon that should be considered for timber, because these elements, because they're massive and they're utilized in the building once, those building elements can be reused. And actually, that was something really cool that we did at Sidewalk Labs to prove this out. And I know other groups have done this, like Lend-Lease and Homes, and Red Brick did it with Structure Craft, where you build a building that can be disassembled. And if we really start to think about that for our buildings and our future, then the biogenic conversation becomes very real, because there's the lifespan of a building, which is maybe 50 years, which we design for now. And if you could take those building elements out and reuse them for a future building, that is the real value of this product. And thinking about it from a biogenic carbon standpoint, it adds even more value.
That's very cool. I had the episode that was released yesterday was Eric Corey Freed from Canon Design, and much of what he talked about during the episode was reusing elements from the building, designing, like if you designing a kitchen to be dismantled because the kitchen's going to get remodeled every 10 years, those sorts of things. So yeah, it's really cool to hear you talking about that. I have to jump in and tell you one more little fun fact. My very first co-op work term was with Stora Enzo, like back in
Ah,
my university days. Yeah, they used to own a pulp mill here on Cape Breton Island in sunny Nova Scotia, and I worked in the lab for them back in the '80s. So it's funny to hear that name again, and in this context too. That's really cool. Challenges. Let's talk about the challenges that the industry is facing today, Dean. What would you say are the big industries that are big challenges that you're facing?
yeah, I think, construction, obviously, we've been through some challenges. We had COVID, we had our supply chain scares, and now there's,
Hmm.
interest rates, which are, affecting projects and projects getting funded and moving forward. For mass timber specifically, though, I think it's interesting challenges because one, the market is still new. And so there's no real standard for these buildings yet. And that presents both an opportunity and a challenge because teams are approaching this and it's consultants, it's the cities, the jurisdictions, the special inspectors, it's the contractors, the builders, the subcontractors, all these entities. Construction is a very, dynamic industry where you need all these parties to play together properly to and work effectively to have a project be successful. There's also the financial piece of it, and like I build up builder's risk insurance, which is a challenge for us right now, where we're facing a premium because there's not enough data on these buildings. And so hopefully as more buildings are being built, there's more data to go back and verify that, hey, these buildings are safe, if not safer than certain types of construction. That's a challenge. I think another one is definitely code. Even though we've had amazing advancements in the code, thankful to hundreds of individuals that have pushed on the code. The challenge that we have now is that even though the International Building Code is set as a standard, there's nuances in there. And again, it's new to certain jurisdictions and definitely inspectors. And so I think it's just going to take time and education to kind of make it more ubiquitous across the country as different states and different cities or jurisdictions have different levels of adoption. Some have adopted the 2021 code, which was kind of the first edition of taller timber buildings. And other jurisdictions have adopted the 2024 International Building Code, which is kind of like it's the second edition of the tall timber buildings. And in there's nuances to each. And so, yeah, I would say, and then probably the third one is probably the supply chain. As we're doing projects across the country, the Pacific Northwest was kind of a hub for mass timber. It had,
Hmm.
some of the first suppliers in D.R. Johnson, and we were thankful to be able to work with, partners like Structurlam, who's been recently bought out by Mercer. But now we're seeing a lot more activity on the East Coast, and that's also where we're seeing a lot more investment. Investment by, again, Mercer and SmartLam, groups up in the Northeast like Nordique. And so hopefully as the supply chain grows, then it becomes more robust for the North American market because we're still seeing a lot of tall timber projects that are actually utilizing European fiber, which there's nothing wrong with that. And that's one of the advantages that we have of coming to the market in North America is that we're able to, borrow and utilize our European counterparts who have a lot more experience in this and supplement our supply chain, which is maybe not as robust yet in North America, but there's definitely a significant amount of investment that's happened over the past few years that's helping grow our capacity. But yeah, that's maybe one more challenge is the supply chain it's still in its infancy. Like I mentioned before, if you look at a lot of suppliers that are in mass timber, they may have done glulam and other wood products for a long period of time, but they may have only done mass timber specific products like CLT for, a handful of years.
Are you seeing projects come up in, New England, Mid Atlantic, New York, Philadelphia? Are you starting to see projects happening there?
Absolutely. Yeah. And part of it, again, is the code adoption. But now that the code has been adopted, there's, kind of the way I've seen it come through cities is there's kind of, you get your first projects and it may take, another 2 to 5 years after that, where all of a sudden, those projects kind of emblematically affect the built environment, and you start to see more and more pop up, and then it's kind of your hockey stick growth curve of more projects in that region. And so yeah, New York, we've got work in the region, New Jersey, DC, Atlanta, starting to see a lot of more work on the East Coast for sure.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right, Dean, every show I have a question that I ask. So, and I ask this question and I get our guests to answer from whatever perspective they'd like. Okay. And here's the $1 million question. It's what makes a great building?
Oof, I should have been prepared for this, but for me, I guess I'll try and answer this two ways. For me, being on a project team, I think there's always a challenge on any project. No project is easier without its challenges. And I think what makes a project special is overcoming the challenges and working as a team and having a holistic effort to complete a project. In my book, that is always a good project. I think externally, if I'm not having worked on something, or if I'm looking at a building, I do like buildings that give back to the community in some sense. They're not just a building smashing in as many units as they can with no street level engagement or community orientated design. I think something that gives back to the community, something that is, you can tell that the team put effort into it. That makes a good building.
Yeah, very cool. I like that. Okay, is there anything that you'd like to announce? Anything that you'd like to promote while we're chatting, Dean?
I thank you for the opportunity. And I guess, yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about mass timber or what we're doing at Skanska, definitely reach out on LinkedIn. You can search on Google, just search Skanska Mass Timber. We have our Saros website with all the other information there on our projects, and can definitely help out, and would happy to, educate or communicate in any way.
Oh, cool. All right. Skanska is Skanska.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure that people would know where to look. All right. Dean, thank you so much. It was a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Take care.
You too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.